Imagine a wild mustang caught in the thick of a forest, trapped in an unlikely predicament, a tree. His body was bruised, exhausted, and unable to escape the circling jaws of a wolf pack. Everyone believed it was the end, but then something incredible happened. A pair of hunters, expecting only to track game, stumbled upon this mustang with a story to tell and a will to survive. What happened next would transform everything you thought you knew about second chances. Stay with us, for this is a tale of resilience, fate, and an unexpected miracle. The forest was alive with the sounds of the wild, yet an eerie silence hung in the air, pressing against the trees and drowning out the rustling leaves and chirping birds. Once free and untamed, the wild mustang lay trapped, his body ensnared in the gnarled branches of a tree. His coat, once a brilliant chestnut red, was now matted with blood and dirt. He gasped for breath, each inhale sending a sharp pain coursing through him. Helpless, he was surrounded by the wolf pack, their growls echoing through the woods as the scent of blood drew them ever closer. The mustang's wide, terrified eyes darted between the wolves and the forest beyond, but there was nowhere to run. Stranded and tangled in the thick branches, he was a prisoner of his circumstances. The wolves waited, biding their time for the right moment to strike. No one had witnessed his fall. No one had heard his desperate struggle to escape. No one except the hunters searching for game. Tracking through the dense forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush, one of them, Jason, caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye, a flash of chestnut red amid the shadows. "Hey, look at that," Jason whispered to his partner, Matt, motioning toward a clearing ahead where the mustang struggled to free himself from the tree's grasp. Matt squinted through the trees. "What the hell is that? A horse? How did it get tangled up in there?" Jason had no answers, but the unsettling nature of the scene weighed heavily on him. The mustang's eyes, wide with fear, revealed his injuries, and Jason knew that the horse wouldn't be able to defend himself much longer as the wolves drew nearer. "We need to help him," Jason insisted, urgency filling his voice. But Matt hesitated. "Are you sure this is a wild mustang? He's not our responsibility. He's been living out here for a reason." Jason's heart sank at the thought of leading the mustang to face certain death. It felt wrong. Looking into the animal's desperate eyes, something inside him shifted. Without waiting for Matt's response, Jason drew his rifle and made his way toward the clearing. As he approached, the weight of his decision settled heavily on his shoulders. It was a risk. The mustang could lash out, driven by the fierce spirit that had kept him alive. Yet Jason had witnessed too much suffering in his life to turn his back on this animal. The wolves growled low, their presence sending a chill through the air. Jason raised his rifle, his eyes locked on the pack as he moved cautiously toward the mustang. Despite his injuries, the horse remained alert. His body trembled as his instincts kicked in. The mustang's eyes met Jason's, and for a moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. The man was there to help, not to hurt. As Jason neared, he whispered to the mustang, his voice low and soothing, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. We're going to get you out of this." The wolves hesitated, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, their growls faltering. Jason kept his focus on the mustang, whose body seemed to sag with relief at the sound of his voice. The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of the mustang's plight hanging over them all. The horse's breathing slowed, but it was clear that his strength was waning. Jason knew he had to act quickly. With a few more cautious steps, he reached the mustang's side, his hand steady despite the circumstances as he began to untangle the horse's legs from the branches. He felt the warmth of the mustang's body, the pulse of life beneath his skin, but the animal was barely hanging on. As the last branch was cleared, Jason gently urged the mustang to rise, guiding him to his feet. The mustang, though weak and trembling, stood unsteady but alive. Jason glanced over his shoulder to see Matt approaching, his face pale with concern. The wolves had retreated, sensing they had lost their chance. "We did it," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. But the mustang's journey was far from over. He was still weak, still in pain, and the woods were no place for an injured animal to recover. Jason scanned the distant trees and spotted a cabin not far away, a place where they could shelter the mustang and nurse him back to health. "We need to get him to safety," Jason declared resolutely, marking the beginning of an incredible journey, a journey of healing, trust, and survival. Jason had seen many things in his life that shook him to his core, that made him question humanity's place in the world. But this was different. The wild mustang standing beside him was no longer just a creature of the wild. He had become something much more. Jason felt an intense urge to protect the mustang, guiding him through the challenges ahead. The horse trembled as they navigated the forest, each step heavy with exhaustion. His ribs were visible, and blood from his wounds began to stain the ground below. Jason kept a steady hand on the Mustang's shoulder, whispering reassurances even though he wasn't sure the horse could hear him. The Mustang's body language shifted. While still skittish, he leaned into Jason's touch, silently acknowledging the safety offered. They moved cautiously, the threat of the wolves lingering in their minds. The pack had retreated for the moment, but Jason knew they wouldn't easily abandon their prey. The wilderness was rife with danger, and they were in its depths. The trees seemed to close in around them, shadows lengthening as the sun sank lower. The path ahead remained uncertain, but Jason couldn't turn back, not when the Mustang depended on him. After what felt like hours, the weight of their journey pressed heavily on Jason's shoulders. The Mustang had slowed, his steps growing increasingly labored, and Jason sensed his strength fading. It wasn't merely the injuries, it was the toll of surviving in the wild, the constant vigilance and the struggle for food and water. Jason had no idea how long the Mustang had been out there, but he recognized one thing: the horse needed help, and he was the one to provide it. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Jason's attention just beyond the trees. He spotted the faint outline of a cabin, and relief washed over him, though briefly. He had no clue what condition the cabin was in. It had been abandoned for years, used only by hunters and travelers seeking shelter. Yet it was their best option, and that was enough for now. "We're almost there, buddy," Jason murmured, urging the Mustang forward. The horse stumbled, his legs buckling under his own weight. Jason's heart stopped as he watched the Mustang struggle to remain upright. Without thinking, he rushed forward, grabbing the Mustang's reins and helping him back up. Their eyes met, filled with exhaustion but also a deeper connection. For a fleeting moment, Jason thought he saw gratitude reflected in the Mustang's eyes. That brief glance filled him with purpose. This was about more than saving a wild animal. It was about forming a bond between two beings who had been strangers, now relying on one another for survival. They continued forward, Jason leading with steady steps, the cabin only a few hundred yards away. However, as they neared the clearing, a sudden sound shattered the silence. Low growls, faint yet unmistakable. Jason froze, instinctively reaching for his rifle as he scanned the woods for the source. Just beyond the tree line, he spotted the wolves. They hadn't given up. His heart raced as he looked at the Mustang, who was now visibly weakening, his legs trembling. Jason knew he had to decide: stand and fight or keep moving. But the wolves were drawing closer, their growls growing louder and more confident. The clearing ahead was their only chance. The cabin was within reach, but Jason realized they couldn't outrun the pack. If the wolves were determined, it would become a fight for survival. "Come on, buddy, just a little further," Jason urged, his voice calm but urgent. He sensed the Mustang's hesitation, the animal's fear palpable. Jason understood the horse was exhausted, on the brink of collapse, but they had come too far to give up now. As the wolves closed in, Jason tightened his grip on the reins. He knew this was their moment. They had to reach the cabin or risk not surviving the night. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating as they neared safety. Each step felt like an eternity, with the wolves' growls growing louder, their hunger evident as they circled the clearing. Jason's heart pounded, his mind racing. The cabin was so close, yet it felt as if the wolves were closing in with every passing second. The Mustang struggled to maintain his balance, legs shaking from fatigue, blood staining the ground as they moved. Jason could see the strain in the Mustang's eyes, reflecting his own fear and uncertainty. But there was no time to rest or second-guess their situation. "Stay with me, buddy," he muttered, his voice steady despite the gnawing fear. He encouraged the Mustang onward, each step bringing them closer to safety. Yet the wolves weren't going to let them escape easily. Jason's gaze darted to the forest, his rifle firmly in his left hand, ready for whatever might come next. He knew outrunning the wolves was impossible. They were faster, more agile, and outnumbered him. The only thing that mattered now was reaching the cabin before the pack descended upon them. The wolves had ceased their growling for a moment, as if sensing the imminent confrontation. Jason's hand hovered over the trigger of his rifle, prepared to act. At the first sign of an impending attack, the Mustang seemed to sense something Jason hadn't yet recognized. Despite his fear, there was a noticeable change in the horse's demeanor. His head was high, and his ears were alert. The Mustang was no longer merely a passive creature. He was fully aware and present, more so than since Jason had discovered him. They had formed a partnership. It was no longer just about survival. It was about a shared instinct and a common will to endure the night. Jason turned his focus back to the approaching wolves, now in the clearing, their eyes reflecting hunger as they closed in from all directions. A large gray wolf, the leader of the pack, stepped forward, body low and muscles tense, poised to attack. The rest of the pack followed suit, their movements synchronized in a coordinated assault. Jason's mind raced as he assessed his options. The rifle was loaded, but he had a limited number of shots. The Mustang was too injured and too slow to flee, leaving them with slim chances. Yet the cabin was close, and they were almost there. He had one shot, one opportunity to make it. "Come on, just a little further," Jason urged, his voice steady even as panic began to creep in. The wolves were now just feet away, their teeth bared and growls echoing in the frigid air. The Mustang hesitated, his body shaking from exhaustion, but Jason could see a flicker of determination in his eyes. This was no longer just a wild animal. He was a partner, a living creature that had fought for his life, and now Jason was prepared to fight for him. The wolves lunged in a flash, prompting Jason to raise his rifle and take aim at the lead wolf. The crack of the shot shattered the forest silence, reverberating through the trees. The lead wolf yelped in pain, momentarily stunned, causing the pack to falter and hesitate. It was their moment of indecision, Jason's chance to push forward. "Go," he shouted, urgency lacing his voice. Despite his injuries, the Mustang surged forward with unexpected strength, his hooves pounding the ground as they raced toward the cabin. Jason kept his eyes fixed on the wolves as they regrouped, now just steps behind. As they reached the cabin, Jason flung open the door and pulled the Mustang inside. Just as the wolves circled back, he quickly bolted the door behind them, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The Mustang stumbled to a corner, collapsing onto the floor but alive. The wolves' growls could still be heard outside, but for now, Jason had won this battle. The air inside the cabin was thick with tension as he leaned against the wooden door, listening for any signs of the wolves. The growls had subsided for the moment, but the fear still lingered, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Jason's heart raced, breath coming in short gasps as he glanced at the Mustang, who lay in the corner, his body heaving with labored breaths. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Jason's mind spun, caught between relief and the harsh reality of their situation. They were safe for now, but the danger was far from over. The wolves were merely waiting for their next opportunity. Outside those walls, the world was unforgiving. The Mustang let out a soft whinny, drawing Jason's attention back to him. The animal's eyes were wide, trembling not only from physical exhaustion, but also from the mental strain of the night's events. Jason could see the fear reflected in those eyes. The Mustang had endured so much, but Jason knew the hardest part was still ahead. He had to help the horse heal, but how? The cabin was small, providing just enough space to breathe and lacking proper medical supplies. Jason understood what he needed to do, but the weight of their situation hung heavily on him. Without the right resources, he could do little more than offer temporary relief. "Hang in there, buddy," he whispered, kneeling beside the Mustang. His hand gently brushed the horse's coat, feeling the animal twitch beneath his touch. The Mustang was scared, but Jason sensed a spark of determination, a will to live that had kept him going through everything. Suddenly, the sound of scratching at the door broke the silence, and a chill ran through Jason. The wolves were back. They hadn't given up. Their persistence was maddening, a constant reminder of their presence just outside, waiting for another chance. Slowly, Jason stood, glancing at the rifle leaning against the wall. He knew there was no point in trying to fend them off with only one weapon and a fatigued body. His best hope was to wait them out, but how long could they remain hidden in the cabin? The Mustang required immediate care. Waiting too long was not an option. The growls of the wolves grew louder, their frustration evident as they circled outside. Jason moved to the window, peering through the cracks in the wooden boards. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the clearing, and his heart raced as he spotted the wolves moving in the darkness, their eyes glowing with a primal hunger. But among them, he noticed another figure among the trees. Jason squinted. It was another being out in the wilderness, teetering on the edge of danger. He couldn't determine if they were friend or foe, but at that moment, it didn't matter. Either they would help or complicate things further. Without thinking, Jason grabbed his rifle and approached the door, compelled to discover what or who was out there. His heart hammered in his chest, and there was no turning back. The wolves were closing in. If someone else could assist, it could mean the difference between life and death. Jason cracked the door open just enough to peek outside. The cold night air weighed heavily on him, and the Mustang's soft whinnies echoed behind him, forcing him to swallow hard to maintain focus. As the figure drew closer, the shadows enveloped it. Jason's grip tightened around his rifle, ready for anything. When the figure stepped into the moonlight, he was stunned to see it wasn't a person but a wild stallion, a massive black creature radiating power. The mustang inside the cabin stirred, lifting its head weakly as if recognizing its own kind. Jason could hardly believe his eyes. This stallion was magnificent, strong, and untamed. In that moment, he understood that the mustang was not alone. There was more to this world than he had realized. The stallion symbolized hope, a reminder of the wildness that still thrived outside, untouched by fear and desperation. The stallion's hooves struck the ground, breaking the tension in the air. The wolves, sensing the shift, hesitated. Jason couldn't explain it, but the stallion's presence seemed to intimidate the pack, making them less eager to advance. The stallion pulsed with an energy Jason couldn't describe, fortifying his resolve to fight back. With one last glance at the mustang lying in the cabin, Jason stepped outside, determination surging within him. The battle was not yet over. The wild stallion stood at the clearing's edge, its dark coat gleaming under the moonlight like a shadow in the night. Its powerful frame exuded confidence, challenging the wolves lurking just beyond the tree line. Jason felt the tension rise, a silent agreement forming between him and the stallion that neither would back down. For a moment, everything stilled. The wind held its breath, and the growls of the wolves faded into the background. Jason sensed the stallion's intelligence in its poised stance, muscles taut and ready for action. This was not just any horse. It was a creature forged by the wild, a symbol of survival against all odds. Jason tightened his grip on his rifle as he scanned the woods. The stallion had done something extraordinary, but it was not enough to ensure their safety. The wolves would return, they always did. Yet in that brief moment of stillness, Jason realized that the stallion was offering more than protection. He was extending an alliance. He had come to remind Jason that he was not alone, that nature had a way of introducing the unexpected into a fight. Jason had thought the mustang would need to be the one to fight to survive, but it was clear that even the wildest creatures required help. A soft whinny from the cabin broke Jason's thoughts. The mustang had risen to its feet, injuries still visible, but its spirit lifted by the presence of the wild stallion. Jason turned back to the clearing and saw the stallion stepping closer, moving with an elegance that belied its size. It was as if the horse knew the outcome of the impending confrontation. Jason couldn't help but admire the stallion's strength. Despite their differences, one wild and the other tamed, they shared a profound understanding. The stallion's presence seemed to ignite a spark of resilience in the mustang, reminding it that it could also overcome its injuries. But Jason couldn't afford to wait and watch. The wolves were not the only threat. The stallion could be a force of nature, but it couldn't take on a pack alone. Jason's mind raced as he devised a plan. If the stallion could hold the wolves at bay long enough, he might have time to gather the mustang and find a safer position. The wolves were growing bolder, their growls escalating as they pressed forward. Jason could see their gleaming yellow eyes in the shadows. This was their moment to strike. He turned back toward the cabin, urgency coursing through every step. The mustang was moving again, albeit hesitantly, sensing the impending danger. Jason needed to act quickly. He grabbed the rope he had set aside earlier and secured it to the mustang's halter before turning to the stallion. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice barely audible. The stallion snorted in response, its gaze unwavering and focused. Jason understood that this was not just a fight for survival, but a test of trust, courage, and perseverance. The wild stallion had appeared out of nowhere, but now it was up to Jason to demonstrate that the bond they shared could guide them through anything. This was more than a battle, it was a partnership. With the mustang tethered, Jason approached the wild stallion, rifle ready in hand. He had one shot at this. The pack of wolves was closing in rapidly, and he needed to get both horses to safety before the situation turned deadly. The stallion moved alongside him, its dark form like a shadow in the night. Jason felt the strength of the animal next to him, the air thick with an unspoken agreement that they would face this challenge together. The wolves, sensing the challenge advance, their growls escalating into vicious snarls. But Jason was not afraid. Jason was ready. The final test had begun. The forest felt stifling, the air thick with the scent of pine and impending danger. His heart raced as he observed the wild stallion and the injured mustang standing side by side, their eyes fixed on the approaching pack of wolves. The predators circled closer, their growls echoing through the trees, sending chills down his spine. Jason felt his breath hitch in his throat. There was no turning back now. The stakes had never been higher. He had to protect both horses, especially the mustang, whose wounds made him vulnerable. The stallion, undeterred by the looming threat, stepped forward, muscles rippling beneath his coat. He locked his dark eyes onto Jason's, and in that moment, Jason felt a silent understanding between them. The wild horse wasn't just defending himself, he was safeguarding them all. The bond between Jason and the stallion had deepened throughout the night, and he couldn't help but wonder if this stallion had always known what would happen. Jason raised his rifle, its weight grounding him in the moment. He wasn't merely holding a weapon, he was clutching a lifeline, a chance for survival. His fingers tightened around the trigger, but he knew better than to act impulsively. Patience was essential. The wolves needed to make their move first. The wind rustled the leaves above, sending a chill through the clearing. Jason's eyes darted back and forth, nerves on edge as he surveyed the scene. The wolves were closing in, their eyes gleaming with hunger, yet they hesitated. Jason understood that they could smell fear, but they also sensed the power of the wild stallion, an animal willing to fight to the death if necessary. The stallion let out a low, guttural whinny, a challenge to the pack. It echoed through the trees, a reminder that not all prey was easily captured. The wolves, their instincts sharp, paused to weigh the risk. Jason held his breath, waiting. The stallion had issued a warning, but would it suffice? In the silence, the mustang shifted, legs trembling as he attempted to stand taller. Jason turned his attention to him, looking for any signs of weakness. The mustang was still injured, his side slick with blood, and his breathing shallow, but he was standing. He wasn't giving up. Jason's heart swelled with pride for the mustang. He had come so far, pushed beyond his limits, and now with the wild stallion by his side, he had a real chance. However, the wolves weren't about to be outdone. They were closing in again, their low growls reverberating in the air, ready to pounce. But Jason had one more trick up his sleeve. He took a deep breath and raised his rifle, aiming skyward. The blast echoed through the forest, a deafening sound that shattered the tense quiet. The wolves jumped back, startled by the sudden noise, providing the stallion with a moment to lunge forward, his powerful hooves striking the earth with enough force to send the wolves scattering. The pack hesitated, their instincts warning them that the fight wouldn't be worth it. Jason seized the moment, grabbing the mustang's halter and pulling him close as the wild stallion created a barrier between them and the wolves. Realizing they had been outmatched, the wolves turned and fled into the shadows, their howls fading into the distance. The clearing fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the two horses and Jason's pounding heart. The danger had passed, at least for now, but he knew this wouldn't be the last time the wolves came. He had bought them time, but that was all he had. For a moment, everything felt still, as if the world was holding its breath. The stallion, head held high, stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the forest with cautious eyes. The mustang, still shaken, took a hesitant step forward, following Jason's lead. Jason exhaled slowly, wiping his brow. They had made it through the night, but the night wasn't over yet. The first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The stillness of the night was replaced by the soft chirping of birds and distant rustling leaves. Jason, the mustang, and the wild stallion had survived the night, but the real test was just beginning. The mustang's injuries were serious, and even though he had survived the wolf attack, Jason knew he couldn't keep him out in the wild much longer. His breaths were labored, and his body was weak. The stallion, on the other hand, seemed strong, as if he were meant for this life. His wild eyes reflected determination and a primal knowledge of how to survive in the forest. He was a creature of the wild, untamed, and powerful. Jason looked up at the small cabin in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was a refuge, a place where he could tend to the mustang's wounds and give him a fighting chance at survival. However, the stallion made it clear that he wouldn't be tied down. He was a symbol of freedom, a creature that could never be controlled, even by the man who had fought alongside him. Jason approached the mustang, gently resting his hand on the horse's trembling neck. "We're almost there," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The mustang nickered softly, as if understanding, his eyes filled with trust and deep gratitude. Jason's heart swelled. He had realized something throughout their journey. It wasn't just about survival, but about connection. The bond they had formed transcended words and human understanding. It was a bond forged in the heat of battle, in the face of danger, and in quiet moments where they relied on each other. As they slowly made their way toward the cabin, the wild stallion followed, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Jason knew he couldn't keep the stallion forever. He was a free spirit, and no matter how much Jason wanted to, he couldn't cage him. The wildness in his soul couldn't be tamed, but for now, they were together. They had made it through the night, and the mustang had a fighting chance at survival. That was all Jason could ask for. When they reached the cabin, Jason led the mustang inside. The warmth of the small structure was a stark contrast to the cold, harsh world outside. He carefully set the horse down, hands trembling as he began to tend to the mustang's wounds. The stallion, watching from the doorway, seemed content for now, his presence a silent reminder of their bond. Jason looked out the window, his eyes meeting the horizon. The wild stallion had made it clear he wasn't meant for this life. He belonged to the open plains, to the freedom of the wild, and Jason would have to let him go. Turning back to the mustang, who had begun to rest, Jason noticed the tension in the horse's body easing. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, Jason felt a sense of peace settle in his heart. The mustang had survived, and so had he. Blaze's journey from fear to freedom was a testament to resilience, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a horse and its protector. With each step forward, they both learned that hope can flourish even in the darkest of times.